In terms of explaining the effects that eating lower or higher glycemic index foods have on your blood glucose levels, I often like to sketch a mini graph, which is a massive simplification of the effects these have in the foods, but it's actually a very useful tool to explain to people why it's useful to eat lower glycemic index foods to keep your blood glucose levels more stable throughout the day. So the example I often give is a slice of white bread with jam on top that you might have for breakfast, or I just pick from a list of the many breakfast cereals which have a relatively high glycemic index that many people start their day with. Often they'll start with cereal, and toast. And what this will do is release its energy quite quickly into the bloodstream. And we have various hormonal mechanisms to control blood glucose. The major hormone we release in response to a rise in blood glucose levels is called insulin. It's a hormone of storage. Its role is to take things out of the blood and put them into cells, and it can be, it's obviously essential for life. If you don't have insulin, then you can't internalize the external environment, so you can't become nourished from your foods. However, in response to prolonged exposure to different types of high sugar foods, what can happen is that you can be constantly releasing too much insulin. Now, you often hear the phrase insulin makes you fat. It's not strictly speaking true. Insulin doesn't really make you fat. An excess level of sugar and other calories combined with high insulin will mean that the excesses is then converted into body fat. Insulin is actually a very anabolic hormone, and it prevents you, for example, breaking down muscle tissue following exercise. So we can use higher levels of insulin at certain times to facilitate better recovery, or to facilitate growing muscle quickly in terms of rapid sort of anabolic diet programming. So back to choosing foods which are lowering the glycemic index. So the lower the glycemic index, the lower the levels of glucose in the blood, potentially the lower levels of insulin that you will release. It does matter a little bit on this total size of the meal as well. So this is something else you have to take into account. So, you could have something which is high glycemic index, but if you only have 5 grams of it, it's not going to cause a massive surge in insulin levels. So there's a dose-dependent factor in terms of how much insulin you release. And there's also a protein component. So certain proteins will also induce a greater insulin release. So when I'm just describing this to clients, I'll talk about higher glycemic index breakfast cereals, better options centered around lower glycemic index breakfast options like protein pancakes, jumbo rolled porridge oats, omelets with vegetables in them, so you're completely reducing the total sugar exposure. And what this helps them avoid is what I term the blood glucose roller coaster. So it'll be a couple of slices of white bread with jam on for breakfast. Because you get a rapid rise in blood glucose from these types of food, and they're low in fiber and there's no protein with them, what can happen is you feel great for about an hour, and then the insulin pushes your blood glucose levels down quickly, and then within an hour and a half you're feeling hungry. You might be craving something else sugary. You might go for another coffee, a Kit Kat. It might be a bagel or a pastry. You get to lunch, and then lunch might be centered around pastas or sandwiches or a wholemeal bap. Mid-afternoon, the sweet trolley will come around with various like little things in that will be too tempting, and then people might have rice or pasta and so on as part of their evening meal. So what we do is we go through reducing the glycemic index of all those potential carbohydrates, and then balancing it out by increasing the protein with all the meals, bringing in some energy dense high fiber sources of carbohydrate like the cavernera or kale or other grow above the ground vegetables, and then looking through the diet at the good fats and where we can get those in as part of a balanced daily intake.